May 27th, 1941. The North Atlantic. A lone German battleship sits crippled in heaving gray seas, her rudder jammed, circling helplessly toward an approaching wall of British steel. Aboard her, more than 2,000 men know what's coming. The ship's captain has opened the stores. Take whatever you want, they're told. Chocolate, cigarettes, liquor. It's the naval equivalent of a last meal. In less than 2 hours, this ship, the pride of Hitler's navy, the terror of the Atlantic, the vessel that just 3 days earlier destroyed the most beloved warship in the entire British Empire, will be reduced to a burning, shattered hulk. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to a time when one ship could change the course of a world war, back to the construction of a monster. This is the story of the Bismarck. The year is 1936. In Hamburg, Germany, at the Blohm and Voss shipyard, workers lay the keel of what will become the most powerful battleship ever built in Europe. She's being constructed in secret. Officially, Germany tells the world she displaces 35,000 tons, the limit allowed under international treaties. It's a lie. When finished, she'll weigh over 50,000 tons. The deception is deliberate. Hitler is building a weapon designed to terrify. They name her after Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor who unified Germany through iron and blood. The symbolism is clear. This ship represents the rebirth of German naval power. For 4 years, thousands of workers shape her hull. 90% of the construction uses revolutionary welded joints instead of rivets, saving thousands of tons of weight that can be redirected to armor and guns. When she slides into the water on February 14, 1939, Valentine's Day as it happens, Adolf Hitler himself is there to watch. Over 60,000 spectators gather. The Führer delivers a 15-minute speech. Then Otto von Bismarck's granddaughter smashes a champagne bottle against the bow and declares, "By order of the Führer, I christen you Bismarck." The crowd roars. The band plays. A monster is born. But what the cheering crowds don't know, what will haunt this ship from her very first mission, is that the Bismarck has a fatal flaw. To understand what made the Bismarck so terrifying, consider this. To understand what made the Bismarck so terrifying, consider this. A floating fortress, 823 feet long, nearly 3 football fields. She's 118 feet wide, so broad and stable that her gun crews could fire with devastating accuracy even in the roughest Atlantic storms. Her armor constituted 40% of her total weight. A main belt of steel 12.5 inches thick protecting her vitals, deck armor up to nearly 5 inches, designed to stop plunging shells fired from extreme range. 22 watertight compartments meant to keep her afloat even after catastrophic damage. And then there were the guns. 8 15-inch monsters in 4 twin turrets, each barrel 64 feet long. They could hurl an 1,800-pound shell over 22 miles. The shells traveled so fast with such flat trajectories that enemy ships had almost no time to react. For additional firepower, 12 6-inch guns for engaging smaller targets, 16 4-inch anti-aircraft guns, dozens of smaller weapons bristling from every surface. Her top speed? 30 knots, 35 miles per hour. Fast enough to outrun almost any British battleship, and certainly fast enough to run down any convoy she hunted. 2,200 men crewed this weapon, and in May 1941 she was about to be unleashed on the Atlantic. The stakes could not have been higher. Britain was dying. Not from bombs, though the Blitz was raining fire on London every night. Britain was dying from starvation. Everything the island nation needed, food, fuel, weapons, raw materials, came by ship across the Atlantic. German U-boats were already sinking hundreds of thousands of tons of shipping every month. Now imagine adding to that slaughter the most powerful surface warship in European waters, a ship that could intercept convoys, brush aside their escorts, and send ship after ship to the bottom. Winston Churchill would later write that the Bismarck represented his greatest anxiety of the entire war. The thought of her, loose in the Atlantic, decimating convoys at will, kept him awake at night. The British had to stop her, but first they had to find her. May 18, 1941, the German naval base at Gotenhofen occupied Poland. Under cover of darkness, the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen slips her moorings and heads into the Baltic. The next night, the Bismarck follows. Their mission, Operation Rheinübung, Rhine exercise, break into the North Atlantic, find the convoys, sink everything. In command of the little fleet is Admiral Gunther Lütjens, a 52-year-old career officer with a remarkable secret. He's not a Nazi. In 1938, he filed a formal written protest against Kristallnacht, the Nazi pogrom against Jews. His wife is classified as half-Jewish under Hitler's racial laws. None of this stops him from doing his duty. He's already led one successful Atlantic raid, sinking 22 Allied ships earlier that year. But Lütjens is troubled by this mission. He wanted to wait until autumn, when longer nights would provide better cover. He wanted more ships. The battlecruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were supposed to join him, but both are in dry dock with damage. He's being sent out with only 2 ships when the plan called for 4. He goes anyway. Orders are orders. On May 20th, as the German squadron passes through the narrow waters between Denmark and Sweden, something happens that will seal Bismarck's fate. A Swedish cruiser, the Gotland, spots them. For 2 hours, the neutral Swedish ship shadows the German giants. Her captain sends a report to Stockholm. 2 large ships, 3 destroyers, 5 escorts, 12 aircraft. Course 205. Fate intervenes in Stockholm. Sweden is neutral. They shouldn't share military intelligence, but there's a British naval attaché named Captain Henry Denham, and someone, to this day no one knows exactly who, leaks the sighting to him. Within hours, the British Admiralty knows the Bismarck is coming. The question is, where is she going? The British have 2 main options to consider. The Bismarck might try to break into the Atlantic through the Iceland-Faroes Gap, a relatively wide passage but heavily patrolled. Or she might take the Denmark Strait, the narrow ice-choke channel between Iceland and Greenland. They choose to cover both. Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland, aboard the battlecruiser HMS Hood, receives orders to take his squadron north. With him goes the brand-new battleship HMS Prince of Wales, so new that civilian contractors are still aboard trying to fix problems with her gun turrets. The Hood. If the Bismarck is Germany's pride, the Hood is Britain's. Commissioned in 1920, she was the largest warship in the world for 20 years, 860 feet of sleek, deadly beauty. The public adored her. She'd circled the globe on showing the flag missions, and thousands of civilians in ports around the world had walked her decks. She's old now, 21 years in service, and her deck armor is dangerously thin. She was scheduled for a major refit that would add 6 inches of protective steel. The war came before the work could be done. Still, she's the fastest heavy ship in the Royal Navy, and her 8 15-inch guns match the Bismarck's firepower. If anyone can stop the German raiders, it's the mighty Hood. But first, the British need to know which route Lütjens is taking. On May 21st, a Spitfire reconnaissance aircraft photographs the Norwegian fjords and confirms the worst. Both German ships are there, anchored near Bergen. The hunt is on. The next evening, the Germans vanish into the Arctic mists. For 36 agonizing hours, the British have no idea where they are. Then, on the evening of May 23rd, the heavy cruiser HMS Suffolk spots them, the Denmark Strait, the narrow passage, ice to the north, minefields to the south. The Germans are making their break. Suffolk and her sister ship Norfolk shadow the enemy through the night, their radar, primitive by modern standards but revolutionary for its time, tracking the German ships through fog and darkness. Admiral Holland receives the reports. He calculates courses, speeds, intercept points. By morning, if all goes well, he'll have the enemy in his gun sights. The trap is closing, May 24th, 1941. 5:35 a.m. ship's time. The Denmark Strait. Visibility 5 miles, heavy seas, gray sky, gray water, spray whipping across the decks. A lookout aboard Prince of Wales spots smoke on the horizon, then masts. Then the unmistakable silhouettes of 2 warships. The Germans see them too. The sound of British propellers, high-speed screws coming fast, has been picked up on Bismarck's hydrophones. At 5:52, the Hood opens fire from 26,000 yards, nearly 15 miles. The engagement immediately goes wrong for the British. The ships are approaching bow-on, which means they can only use their forward guns. 4 turrets per ship, but only 2 can fire. They're giving up half their firepower. Admiral Holland knows this. He's ordered a turn to bring all guns to bear. But first, he wants to close the range. The Hood's thin deck armor makes her vulnerable to plunging shells at long distance. Get closer and the shells will hit at a flatter angle, striking the thick belt armor instead. It's a race against time. Another problem emerges. In the pre-dawn murk, the two German ships are hard to tell apart. Both have similar profiles. Holland orders fire on the lead ship, but the lead ship isn't the Bismarck. The Prinz Eugen has taken point. Hood's opening salvos are aimed at the wrong target. Prince of Wales correctly identifies the Bismarck and opens fire. She scores 3 hits in the battle's first minutes. One shell punches through Bismarck's bow, rupturing fuel tanks and flooding 1,000 tons of seawater into the ship. Oil streams from the wound, leaving a visible trail on the water. But it's not enough. At 5:55, the Germans return fire. Admiral Lutyens has hesitated. His orders are to avoid combat with enemy warships unless absolutely necessary. But Captain Ernst Lindemann, Bismarck's commanding officer, has had enough. "I will not have my ship shot out from under my ass," he snaps. "Permission to fire." Both German ships concentrate on the Hood. The first salvo from Prinz Eugen lands near Hood's boat deck, 8-inch shells, incendiary. A ready-use ammunition locker catches fire, sending flames leaping into the sky. At 6 a.m., Hood begins her turn to unmask her rear turrets. She never completes it. What happened next remains seared into naval history. At 6:01, Bismarck's 5th salvo roars across 9 miles of gray water. One shell, possibly more, strikes Hood between her mainmast and her rear turret. The shell penetrates, down through the deck armor, that thin, outdated deck armor that was supposed to be reinforced, but never was. Down into the magazines where hundreds of tons of explosives are stored. Witnesses describe what they saw next in almost identical terms. A pillar of flame, a sheet of fire shooting higher than the mass, a giant blowtorch erupting from the heart of the ship. The Hood breaks in two. The stern sinks first. The bow section rises into the air, pointing at the sky like an accusing finger. Some witnesses swear they see her forward turrets fire one final defiant salvo as she goes down. Within 3 minutes, some say 2, the pride of the British Navy has vanished beneath the waves. 1,418 men were aboard. They never had a chance. In the freezing, oil-slicked water, amid the floating wreckage of books and photographs and clothing, 3 men cling to life. 3. Ted Briggs, an ordinary signalman, had been on the compass platform when the shell struck. He was sucked underwater, then blown back to the surface by escaping air. He found a tiny 3-foot square emergency raft and somehow pulled himself aboard. Bob Tilburn, an able seaman, had been at an anti-aircraft gun when 2 men beside him were killed by splinters. He was leaning over the side, sick from the sight, when the ship exploded around him. That's what saved his life. He was already positioned to fall clear. Bill Dundas, a 17-year-old midshipman, kicked out a window and swam clear of the suction. 3 men from 1418. 2 hours later, the destroyer Electra found them, nearly unconscious from cold. Briggs kept his companions awake by holding their hands and singing "Roll Out the Barrel." Back in London, a junior officer handed Captain John Leach of the Prince of Wales a signal form. "What should I tell the Admiralty?" Leach stared at the empty sea where the Hood had been. Tell them the Hood is blown up." The battle wasn't over. Prince of Wales was now alone, facing both German ships. She was taking hits, 7 in total, one of which passed through her bridge, killing or wounding nearly everyone there. Worse, her new gun turrets were malfunctioning. By the end of the engagement, only 5 of her 10 14-inch guns were still working. Captain Leach made a decision that would haunt him. He turned away, laying smoke, retreating to shadow the enemy with the cruisers rather than fight alone. It was the right call. Prince of Wales had accomplished something crucial. Those 3 hits on Bismarck had ruptured her fuel tanks. 1,000 tons of oil were now inaccessible. The ship was leaking like a wounded animal, leaving a trail of evidence wherever she went. The bow damage had flooded forward compartments, pulling Bismarck down by the head. Her speed dropped. Salt water contaminated fuel lines. For Admiral Lutyens, the mission was effectively over. There would be no convoy raiding now. He had to get to port, and the closest friendly port was Saint-Nazaire on the French Atlantic coast, 1,500 miles away. On the bridge of the battered Prince of Wales, Captain Lindemann's counterpart watched the Germans turn southwest. "He's making for France," Leach said. A new race had begun. The news of Hood's destruction hit Britain like a physical blow. This was 1941, perhaps the darkest year of the war for the British. The Blitz was at its height. Greece had fallen. Crete was about to fall. Rommel was advancing in North Africa, and now their greatest warship, their symbol of naval supremacy, had been obliterated in minutes. Winston Churchill's reaction was immediate and absolute. "Sink the Bismarck," he ordered. "I don't care how you do it." The Royal Navy mobilized everything: 6 battleships, 3 battlecruisers, 2 aircraft carriers, 16 cruisers, 33 destroyers, 8 submarines, patrol aircraft from bases across the North Atlantic. This was the largest naval force ever assembled to hunt a single ship. But there was a problem. On the evening of May 24th, as Bismarck turned toward France, she doubled back briefly on her pursuers. It was a feint designed to cover Prince Eugen's escape. The cruiser would break off and continue the raiding mission alone. The maneuver worked too well. In the confusion of the turn, HMS Suffolk lost radar contact. When dawn broke on May 25, the British realized the terrible truth. Bismarck had vanished. The entire North Atlantic stretched before them, thousands of square miles of empty ocean. The wounded battleship could be anywhere. She was racing toward France, and she was going to make it. What happened next is one of the great what-ifs of naval history. Aboard Bismarck, Admiral Lütjens believed he was still being tracked. His ship's primitive radar detection equipment was picking up signals, probably from distant aircraft rather than close pursuers, but he couldn't know that. At 8 a.m. on May 25, Lütjens did something inexplicable. He broke radio silence. He sent a long-coded message to Berlin, over 30 minutes of transmission, broken into segments as per Enigma encryption protocols. The message itself was routine: a report on the battle, the ship's condition, intentions to proceed to France, but the transmission was anything but routine. British radio direction finding stations across the Atlantic picked up the signal. Triangulating from multiple points, they plotted Bismarck's approximate position. She wasn't heading back to Norway, as some had feared. She was making for the Bay of Biscay. A second mistake compounded the first. In plotting the intercept course, someone at the Admiralty made a 10-degree calculation error. The British fleet turned in the wrong direction, wasting 7 precious hours pursuing a phantom. When the error was discovered and corrected, Bismarck had opened her lead. She was now less than 700 miles from the French coast, less than 24 hours from safety. Luftwaffe aircraft would soon be able to provide air cover. U-boats were already being directed to screen her approach. If she made it through one more night, one more day, she would survive. The British were running out of time, and then, on the morning of May 26, a young American changed history. His name was Leonard Tuck Smith, and technically he wasn't supposed to be there. The United States was still neutral in May 1941, but American pilots were secretly helping the British learn to fly their new Catalina patrol aircraft. Observers, they were called, a convenient fiction that fooled no one. On the morning of May 26, Ensign Smith was at the controls of Catalina Z of 209 Squadron, flying out of Northern Ireland on a patrol that had already lasted hours. The pilot, Flying Officer Dennis Briggs, had handed off control to catch some rest. At 10:10 a.m., Smith spotted something through the murk, a dark shape on the gray water. What the devil's that? He banked closer. The shape resolved itself into a massive warship, trailing a slick of oil. Bismarck. The German gunners spotted the Catalina almost immediately. Anti-aircraft fire erupted from every battery on the ship, a wall of steel climbing toward the fragile flying boat. Smith threw the aircraft into violent evasive maneuvers, jettisoning depth charges to lighten the load. Shells punched through the Catalina's hull. One crewman was knocked from his bunk, but Smith got the message off before he fled into the clouds, 690 miles west-northwest of Brest. The Bismarck had been found. Everything now depended on what happened in the next few hours. By noon on May 26, the tactical situation was clear. Bismarck is steaming toward France at 20 knots. In roughly 14 hours, she'll be under Luftwaffe air cover, untouchable. The nearest British battleships are too far away to catch her. HMS King George V and HMS Rodney are burning their engines flat out, but the mathematics don't work. They won't intercept before Bismarck reaches safety. There's only one asset in range, the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal, somewhere to the south. Ark Royal carries Swordfish torpedo bombers. The story becomes almost absurd at this point. The Swordfish is a biplane, an open cockpit, fabric-covered string and wire antique designed in 1933. Maximum speed, 138 miles per hour, and that's without a torpedo. With an 1,800-pound fish hanging under its belly, it struggles to reach 100. Against a modern battleship bristling with anti-aircraft guns and racing at 30 knots, sending in Swordfish seems like sending cavalry against machine guns, but the British have no choice. At 2:50 p.m., 15 Swordfish launch from Ark Royal's pitching deck. The weather is atrocious. Force 8 gale, driving rain, visibility near zero. The carrier's flight deck is rising and falling 50 feet in the heavy seas, and then something goes terribly wrong. In the chaos of the hunt, no one told the Swordfish crews that the cruiser HMS Sheffield had been sent ahead to shadow Bismarck. When the pilots spot a warship through the murk, they attack. They attack their own ship. Fortunately, miraculously, the magnetic detonators on their torpedoes are defective. Most of the weapons explode on contact with the water long before reaching Sheffield. The cruiser escapes undamaged, and her crew, showing remarkable composure, flashes a signal to the retreating aircraft. Thanks for the kippers. Back on Ark Royal, the torpedoes are switched to contact detonators. The Swordfish are refueled. At 7:10 p.m., they launch again. This time they find the right target. The scene that unfolds is extraordinary. 15 canvas and wire biplanes straight out of the First World War, droning through a North Atlantic gale toward the most powerful battleship in European waters. Wind gusting to 50 miles per hour, rain hammering the pilot's goggles, waves reaching up to grab the low-flying aircraft. Aboard Bismarck, every gun that can bear is tracking them. The attack begins at 8:47 p.m. The Swordfish come in low, some at wave-top height, 20 feet above the heaving sea. They split into groups, attacking from multiple angles to divide the defensive fire. Bismarck's gunners throw everything at them. The main battery, those massive 15-inch guns designed to fight battleships, are depressed to minimum angle and fired into the water, trying to create shell splashes that will bring down the attacking aircraft. It doesn't work. The Swordfish are too slow, too maneuverable. Their fabric construction means shells pass through without detonating. The biplanes jink and weave through the fire like insects dodging raindrops. 2 torpedoes find their mark. One hits amidships, causing minimal damage, exactly what Bismarck's armor was designed to absorb. The other hits the stern, and everything changes. The fatal flaw that haunted the Bismarck from her first mission now reveals itself. During sea trials, the ship's designers discovered something alarming. If both rudders were jammed simultaneously, Bismarck could not be steered using her propellers alone. The forces involved were simply too great. Especially in heavy seas, the ship would slew uncontrollably. They noted this in the technical reports. They made plans to address it. The war came first. At 8:47 p.m. on May 26, an 18-inch torpedo struck Bismarck's stern on the starboard side. The explosion buckled the plating and jammed both rudders at 12 to 15 degrees to port. Bismarck could no longer steer. In calm water, the crew might have compensated with the engines, but this was the North Atlantic in a gale. Every time they tried to correct with the propellers, the wind and waves pushed the bow back around. The ship could only steam in circles, and the prevailing wind was driving her back toward the pursuing British fleet. Lütjens understood immediately. At 11:40 p.m., he sent a message to Berlin. "Ship unmaneuverable. We will fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer." On the bridge of HMS King George V, Admiral John Tovey read the intercepted message and allowed himself a grim smile. The Bismarck was doomed, but first she would have to endure the night. At 10:30 p.m., the destroyers arrived, 5 of them, HMS Cossack, Sikh, Maori, Zulu, and the Polish destroyer Piorin. Their job was to harass the crippled battleship until the heavy units could arrive at dawn. The Piorin's attack would become legend. This was a destroyer of 1,370 tons charging a battleship of 50,000, 1/30th the size, a minnow attacking a whale. Her captain, Commander Eugeniusz Płowski, signaled 2 words before opening fire: "I am a Pole." For nearly an hour, Piorin engaged Bismarck alone, her small guns blazing defiance against a ship nearly 3 times her length. Bismarck's return fire eventually drove her off, but not before she'd sent her message. The occupied nations of Europe were fighting back. Throughout the night, the destroyers attacked. 10 torpedo runs, 16 torpedoes fired, none hit. Bismarck's gunners were still fighting, but the psychological effect was devastating. The constant harassment denied the German crew any rest. Star shells burst overhead, turning night into stuttering day. Explosions echoed across the water. On the German ship, morale collapsed. Survivors later described the scene. Admiral Lutyens opened the ship's stores. "Take what you want, boys, chocolate and cigarettes and schnapps, a final indulgence before the end." The crew understood the message. They were being prepared to die. Baron Burkhard von Millenheim-Reckberg, the 4th gunnery officer, encountered both Lutyens and Captain Lindemann just before dawn. Lindemann didn't return his salute. Lutyens returned it but said nothing. It seemed, von Millenheim-Reckberg wrote later, as if the two men most responsible for Bismarck had retreated into their own private worlds. Dawn on May 27 broke gray and cold. At 8:15 a.m., HMS Norfolk spotted Bismarck through the murk. She was still circling, helpless, waiting. At 8:43, King George V sighted her. At 8:47, HMS Rodney opened fire. Rodney carried the largest guns in the Royal Navy, 9 16-inch monsters that could hurl shells weighing over a ton. King George V added 10 14-inch guns. The two cruisers Norfolk and Dorsetshire contributed 8-inch batteries. Bismarck returned fire. Her second salvo straddled Rodney, her closest near miss of the engagement. If her rudder had been working, if she could have maneuvered, the battle might have been different. But she couldn't. At 9:02, a full salvo struck Bismarck's forward superstructure. The explosion destroyed the bridge, the main fire control station, and likely killed Admiral Lutyens and Captain Lindemann where they stood. The ship kept fighting, local control, individual turrets engaging on their own, but the coordination was gone. One by one, the guns fell silent. Anton turret, Bruno turret, César and Dora. By 9:31, Bismarck was defenseless. Rodney closed to 3,000 yards, point-blank range for a battleship, and continued pouring shells into the burning hulk. Over the next hour, the British fired nearly 3,000 shells. Hundreds found their mark. Admiral Tovey watched through binoculars. "What that ship was like inside," he said later, "did not bear thinking of." Below decks, Chief Engineer Gerhard Unack received the order he'd been dreading. Clear ship for scuttling. He set demolition charges with 9-minute fuses and ordered the watertight doors opened. At 10:35, Bismarck began to capsize. At 10:40, she slipped beneath the waves, stern first. 100 minutes from first shot to sinking. Over 2,000 men had served aboard Bismarck. As she sank, perhaps 800 of them were still alive, swimming in the freezing oil-coated water, clinging to wreckage, calling for help. HMS Dorsetshire and HMS Maori moved in to rescue survivors. Nets were thrown over the sides. Exhausted German sailors began climbing to safety. Then at 11:40, a lookout shouted the words every sailor dreads, "Submarine!" A periscope, or what looked like one, had been spotted. The order came immediately. All stop. Engines ahead full. The rescue was abandoned. Dorsetshire pulled away with 85 German sailors aboard. Maori had rescued 25. Behind them, hundreds of men still struggled in the water, reaching toward the departing ships. A British midshipman named Joe Brooks had jumped overboard to help pull wounded Germans from the sea. One sailor had lost both arms and was hanging onto a rope with his teeth. Brooks tried desperately to save him, but failed. When the submarine alarm sounded, Brooks himself was nearly left behind. A line was thrown to him at the last moment as Dorsetshire gathered speed. Later that day, the German submarine U-74 pulled 3 more survivors from a dinghy. A weather ship found 2 others the next morning. 115 men. That's all who lived. 2,100 died. The most haunting story belongs to Captain Ernst Lindemann. Multiple survivors witnessed his final moments. As Bismarck rolled, flooding, sinking, Lindemann walked to the forecastle. His personal messenger, a young seaman whose name is lost to history, walked beside him. As the deck tilted steeper and steeper, Lindemann turned to the young man. "Go," his gestures said. "Save yourself. Get off the ship." The messenger refused. Together they climbed the rising bow. Together they walked out onto the stem, the very front of the ship, as it rose higher and higher into the air. And there, as Bismarck lay completely on her side, as the cold Atlantic reached up to claim her, Captain Ernst Lindemann raised his hand to his white officer's cap. He saluted. The ship and the saluting captain slid beneath the waves together. The sinking of the Bismarck ended Germany's surface naval ambitions. Hitler, shattered by the loss, never again permitted his capital ships to sail without his personal approval. The great battleships that were supposed to rule the Atlantic spent the rest of the war hiding in Norwegian fjords. The U-boats carried on the fight alone. For the British, it was a victory that felt like a wound. 3,500 men had died in 8 days, more than 1,400 on the Hood alone. The Navy had won, but at terrible cost. The survivors scattered to their fates. Ted Briggs, the signalman from Hood, served 35 more years in the Royal Navy. He spent his later life keeping the memory of his lost shipmates alive, visiting the wreck in 2001 with a deep-sea expedition. He died in 2008, the last survivor. Baron von Millenheim-Rechberg became a diplomat after the war. He wrote the definitive survivor's account, Battleship Bismarck, and lived until 2003. Ensign Leonard Smith, the American who wasn't supposed to be there, received the Distinguished Flying Cross. The United States entered the war 6 months later. Smith served in Korea and Vietnam, retiring as a Navy captain. He died in 2006, 90 years old, and the Bismarck herself. In 1989, Robert Ballard, the man who found the Titanic, discovered her wreck 4,790 meters down, 470 miles west of France. She rests upright on an underwater mountain, her hull remarkably intact, her deck still showing traces of the painted swastikas that once proclaimed her allegiance. Ballard kept the exact location secret. "It's a grave," he said. "Let the dead rest." Today, the Denmark Strait is quiet. The convoys no longer sail. The great battleships are gone, made obsolete by the very carrier aircraft that doomed the Bismarck. But somewhere beneath those gray, cold waters, over 3,000 men lie waiting, German and British, hunter and hunted, victor and vanquished. The sea keeps them all. Perhaps it's a tale of hubris, a ship declared unsinkable, sent to sea with a fatal flaw. Perhaps it's a story of courage, swordfish pilots in canvas biplanes, Polish destroyers charging battleships, a captain saluting as his ship goes down. Perhaps it's simply a reminder of war's terrible arithmetic. One shell falling at the right angle at the right moment can kill 1,400 men in 3 minutes. A single torpedo striking a single rudder can doom 2,000 more. The Bismarck's entire operational career lasted 8 days. In that time, she killed and died, terrified and was destroyed, entered legend and became a grave. 8 days that changed the course of naval warfare, 8 days that the world still remembers.